Mars. I always thought of it as a romantic place, a planet of mystery and adventure.
Red Faction 2 is the sequel to Red Faction, the first-person shooter that unleashed the woefully false-advertised Geomod engine onto the gaming industry, released originally in 2001. The sequel was developed across a multitude of platforms by a few different development teams, most importantly Volition Inc. for the PlayStation 2, and Outrage Games for the PC. Despite these multiple versions, Red Faction 2 feels like a console shooter through and through, and does very little to leave its mark on the genre. Taking place after the events of the first game, the player takes on the role of Alias, a so-called demolitions expert working with a special forces group for Chancellor Victor Sopot. All of the members of the group have the expected skill set. There's a sniper, a heavy weapons guy, a pilot, and a sneaky assassin type. You might recognise the voices of Lance Henriksen and Jason Statham along the way, neither of whom do anything creative with the dialogue, and seem to be there to do little more than just give some sort of credibility to the game. Both of the characters they portray have a pretty big role in the story though, so at least the developers got their bang for the buck.
Nice shooting, partner.
In what serves as a tutorial/prologue, Alias breaks into a militia base to steal nanotech research data created by the antagonist K-Pek from the first Red Faction game. And then after this prologue mission, we're told through a hasty cinematic that Sopot betrays the group and has them outlawed. The group then teams up with the Red Faction, which at this point I think just refers to any kind of resistance group, and they set off to kill Sopot. There's another twist in the story about halfway through which sets up the second half of the campaign, but I won't spoil that. Overall, this is a pretty brisk campaign. I think in total you're looking at about 3 hours, maybe 4 absolute tops if you really take your time to complete all the side objectives. You get this overall sense of there being not much effort put into things. I mean, the cinematics feel quickly thrown together, and on the whole it just feels very sloppy. Now, I mentioned the game feels like a console shooter through and through, and there's a couple of resounding reasons as to why this is. For starters, all of the chapters are broken up into smaller, short segments, and I don't think I'm exaggerating to say that some of these can be finished in around 60 seconds. There's no checkpoint system either, and you have to finish all of these in a single hit, which isn't an issue for some of them, like those shorter ones, but it can be for others when you're in vehicles for long periods of time, you know, during those on-rail sequences that tend to wear out their welcome, or during some of those missions when you're required to fight your way through large groups of enemies. Red Faction 2 uses a similar health bar system to Halo, where you've got a regenerating health bar and 3 medkits. It isn't really that hard of a game, and like I said, most of the levels are quite short, so this doesn't ever really become much of an issue, but it also does attribute to it feeling very consoleized. I guess the other reason too is that the game looks pretty damn crappy. Visuals aren't all that much of a problem if the gameplay is enjoyable, but the issue here is that it looks arguably worse than the first game. I think this is an early and a perfect example of when multi-platform games started taking a presentation hit to accommodate the weaker hardware of the consoles. And as a result, PC players had to put up with a game that was designed around their platform as a secondary concern. In all fairness, sure, the first game wasn't all that flash, even for its time, but it is really surprising how this sequel truly does look worse in a lot of ways. I'm talking poorly animated character models, ugly texture work, and just very simplistic level design. Quite often you'll see these basic looking corridors with practically no detail put into them, just long, empty, vast spaces of nothingness. It seems to make up for this, they've used a lot of variety in between each chapter, which is admirable. And I really like the way that the rain looks in this game. In fact, lots of other games around this time also had really good looking weather effects. Metal Gear Solid 2 and Time Splitters 2 as an example, but overall Red Faction 2 just looks very dull. Again, the whole Geomod engine thing has been really underutilized. The first game had some great moments where you could go nuts with the destructible environments with explosives and rocket launchers. Red Faction 2, on the other hand, I think maybe has half a dozen moments where you really feel like you're able to interact with the game world and tear down various structures. But these are over so quickly and so heavily scripted that it never reaches its full potential. Now look, it's not a total write-off. I mean, there are some neat sections throughout the campaign. There's a mech suit that you get your hands on a couple of times throughout the campaign. There's one section where you're in a tank, and another where you're in the gunner seat of a chopper, swerving between skyscrapers as you pepper the streets with gunfire.
Way to go, Alias!
Now these are heavily scripted and you're just moving down this very preset path, but they are a good way at breaking up the tedium, and they showcase those few moments where you actually get to go nuts with the Geomod engine. There's also a few cool interior shootouts where there's a decent amount of destructible elements, or just lots of props that turn into a shower of particles when they're shot at. but these moments are too few and far between, and it just never delivers, sitting firmly in this pit of mediocrity. Now, this isn't for lack of trying on the amount of guns this game gives you, from pistols, machine guns, assault rifles, sniper rifles, rocket launchers. The list just goes on and on. I think there's around a dozen weapons in total, and they are genuinely fun to mess around with. I also love dual wielding guns like I'm in some sort of John Woo film, and I think there's about 4 or 5 different weapons you can do this with as well. Some of these weapons have alternate fire modes and can give you a few different options when going into a gunfight, but they're just really lacking any sense of impact or power. Even the rocket launchers don't feel all that destructive, and for a shooting game, this kind of thing is something you really need to nail. Outside of the campaign, there's a neat bot match mode where you can set up death matches against bots of various skills in a few different maps. Now, these maps surprisingly make half decent use of the Geomod engine, and they're a fun enough way to kill some time if you're bored. Lastly, completing side objectives and the story missions on higher difficulties unlocks all manner of extras like low resolution concept art. Now, I've never seen the appeal of this in games. It's like how on DVDs they'd throw in a trailer for the film that you just bought, like anyone really gave a shit. But at least it does show the amount of work that Volition Inc. put into the behind the scenes portion of the game, and for completionist types, it really could extend the lifespan of the game on the whole. But overall, Sunny Jim's Red Faction 2 just never did it for me, not back then and not now either. They had a pretty solid foundation to improve upon with the first game, and yet they just didn't really achieve anything all that new, often taking a step backwards in the process. There's no overall political message or agenda they're trying to present with the game's storyline, even though it is very politically orientated. The shooting and the visuals are cookie cutter at best, and the Geomod technology once again just doesn't reach its full potential. This is the last first-person shooter game in the series, and after this they took the series in an entirely new direction. As a result, I think this is pure bargain bin stuff in every sense of the word. But if you're one of those FPS nuts who just has to play everything, then look, there are worse games out there to be sure.